So Tim Bradley's obviously got this fight against Jesse Vargas taking place on Saturday night. So we have to see how that goes and see how Tim looks. But in recent interviews, he's been talking about stepping up to 160 and taking on Gennady Golovkin. Now, the first time he said it, most people assumed he was just joking around or trolling or whatever. But since then, he's come out in subsequent interviews and reiterated the statement and said, no, I'm actually serious. I'll step up to 160 and I'll fight Golovkin. Since all the middleweights seem to be pussies, I'll step up and fight him. That's crazy. That's crazy. You know, you wonder if Tim has taken too many hard shots in his career when he's coming out with statements like that. And remember, Tim is on HBO. He's with Bob Arum, so even though Golovkin is not a Bob Arum fighter, he's on HBO as well. And as far as I know, he's not with a promoter who's going to have any type of clash with Bob Arum. So that fight could potentially happen. They don't have any network conflict there. This ain't even like, because RUSLAN Lara's been calling out Golovkin, but Lara's on Showtime and he's with Al Heyman. So is that really a serious call out? I mean, cross-network fights can happen. Don't get it twisted. They absolutely can happen. But all I'm saying is you can also hide behind, you know, network difficulties and stuff like that. Network differences. You could call someone out, but then you could hide behind the network and say, oh, we can't really make the fight because the networks can't figure this out and blah, blah, blah. But with Tim Bradley, he don't have that. So him calling out Golovkin seems more genuine. Tim Bradley is a blue-collar fighter. He is a fighter who's come up the hard way. There are very few fighters in boxing who have had as many back-to-back tough fights against high-quality opposition as Tim Bradley. Maybe nobody. He might have the best resume in terms of taking on top fighters back-to-back to back-to-back. I mean, this is a guy who went to the UK to take on Junior Witter in his backyard, got that win. He beat an undefeated Lamont Peterson. He beat an undefeated Devon Alexander. He beat an undefeated Luis Abregu. Right? He obviously fought and beat Ruslan CHAGAEV. He fought Pacquiao twice. You know, I'll probably miss some people out here as well. You know, just fought Diego Chavez and whatnot. This guy has had a very, very tough career against top flight fighters. He beat Marquez as well. That's another guy I forgot to mention. This guy's had back-to-back fights against top, you know, tough opponents. He's just not afraid. And maybe we've talked about it in previous Tim Bradley fights, like in the Provodnikov fight particularly. Maybe this is a case of Tim Bradley's heart getting the better of him in a major way when he's talking about fighting Golovkin. Because as far as I'm concerned, he would get destroyed by Gennady Golovkin. Maybe Golovkin ain't used to fighting a guy so short and the speed of Bradley and all that. It wouldn't take him that long to catch up with him, in my opinion. And Tim Bradley don't have the power to get Golovkin's respect and keep him off him. So I would obviously be taking Golovkin by stoppage in that fight. And Bradley's also been talking about stepping up to 154 for some time and fighting people like Canelo, for example. And given the fact that De La Hoya and Bob Arum are willing to work with each other now, there's no reason why that fight potentially couldn't happen at some stage. Canelo versus Tim Bradley. So, you know, you got to take your hat off to Tim Bradley in terms of his heart. He's cut from old school cloth. He is one of those guys who says, you know what, I'll fight anyone. The only time when he was reluctant to fight someone was Amir Khan at 140, and that's because he was in some type of contractual dispute with his promoter at the time, Gary Shaw. As soon as he got out of that contractual dispute, he said, yeah, bring on Amir Khan. And in fact, he was supposed to fight an eliminator with Amir Khan to be the next guy in line to face, I believe, Kell Brook for the IBF title. Correct me if I'm wrong. Kell Brook, remember, Tim Bradley was supposed to fight Frankie Gavin in an IBF eliminator. And the reason it was supposed to be Gavin is because Amir Khan removed himself for the IBF eliminator. So we were supposed to have Khan and Bradley fighting this year. But, you know, as I say, Amir Khan pulled out. So, yeah, he does have that one duck. You have to call it a duck when he ducked Khan. But aside from that, which, you know, did he really duck Khan because he was afraid? Do you believe that? I don't believe that. I believe it was because he was having problems with Gary Shaw and he didn't want to have any big fights like that where maybe he wasn't getting the percentage that he felt like he deserved while he was still with Gary Shaw. He wanted to sign a better deal with a different promoter before he went ahead and got in the ring with someone like an Amir Khan. So aside from that, this guy's ducked nobody, and he's cut from the old school. He's like a Roberto Duran type character. He's like a Marvin Hagler, or even though some people are going to say Marvin Hagler ducked the body snatcher, but you know, it is what it is. For the most part, there are certain old school fighters who would just fight anyone, Muhammad Ali or whatever. You know, that's the kind of cloth that Tim Bradley is cut from. And, you know, like I say, Roberto Duran type guy. Remember, Roberto Duran was a guy who was the same dimensions as Juan Manuel Marquez. Roberto Duran's best days were at lightweight, and yet he stepped up to 160 pounds and fought Iran Barkley for the middleweight title. And Barkley was a guy who knocked out Tommy Hearns, who was, obviously most of you know that Tommy Hearns knocked out Roberto Duran in 2 rounds, brutally. All right? So you got Hearns knocking out Duran brutally in 2 rounds. Obviously, Hearns is much bigger than Roberto Duran. You know, Hearns is like the size of like Andy Lee or something, probably bigger than Andy Lee. He's same kind of height, but you know, Hearns went all the way up to cruiserweight later on in his career. And he's obviously hell of a lot better than Andy Lee. Punches harder, faster, etc. So a guy that size going up against a guy the size of Marquez. And obviously Duran got blitzed in that fight. And then a guy who's just as big, or if not bigger than Tommy Hearns, came along in Iran Barkley, knocked out Hearns. And then Duran goes and fights Barkley. Like, it seemed insanity at the time, but he did it and he beat Barkley. It's literally someone the size of Juan Manuel Marquez fighting someone the size of an Andy Lee or bigger than Andy Lee. It's like someone Marquez's size fighting someone the size of Carl Froch. That's what Roberto Duran did. So fighters of that type of era, fighters who are cut from that type of cloth, they really have no fear. And Tim Bradley seems to be one of those type of guys, man. He has no fear, and he's serious about the Golovkin situation. I would definitely advise him against it, because he's not a puncher like Duran was. Duran, even though his best days were at lightweight, he was definitely a blown up lightweight when he fought for the middleweight title. He still had power. Strangely enough, he still had power at middleweight. Whereas Tim Bradley don't even have power at light welterweight. And he don't have power at welterweight, so he's definitely not going to have no power at middleweight. Anyway, let me know what you think about Tim Bradley and his his apparent insanity. Let's help him out.